and the Madani period begins. And here we have one of the first major turning points in Islamic history, the Battle of Khandaq. And what happens at the Battle of Khandaq when a 10,000 strong coalition army marches all the way from Mecca, and the surrounding Jewish tribes also join in, and they make an alliance, and they all march towards Medina. The Muslims, in a state of, to protect themselves, they dig a trench around Medina to try and survive this oncoming army. And when they are digging this trench, amidst the famine that is also happening in Medina at this time, and the companions, they have tied rocks to their stomachs. One of the companions, they tie a rock to their stomach to stop themselves from falling over because of the hunger that they are facing. They go to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and they see that he has two rocks tied to. They complain, saying, "Look, we've got a rock tied to our stomach out of difficulty." And the Prophet lifts up his shirt and says, "You got one, I've got two rocks tied to my stomach because of the difficulty that I'm going through." And amidst all of this, they find that there's this boulder that they can't break, this massive rock that they can't break. And all the big and strong companions, Umar radiallahu anhu, and all of them, they try to break this, but they can't. So they go to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu and they tell him that, we can't break this rock. Maybe you should try. Bearing in mind, the Prophet is over 55 years old at this point, maybe 56, 57, around that age, right? And he's an old man, right? And he's starving. So they tell him, "Can you break this?" So they get the rock. So he gets his stick and he hits the rock 3 times. And with each time, there's a flash of lightning. And he says, "Allahu Akbar." And this happens 3 times. And the companions ask him afterwards, "What happened? Why did you say Allahu Akbar?" And he says, "Because each time I was shown a vision. And I said, Allahu Akbar, at how grand this vision was." And what was it? With one of the strikes, I was shown the gates of Damascus. I was shown that we will conquer. I was shown Syria. I was shown that we will conquer it. And from here, I can see the gates of Damascus itself. Damascus was like the capital of Roman rule in Syria. In another vision, I was shown that we will conquer Persia, and I can see the gates of Madain or Ctesiphon, the capital of the Persian Empire. I can see that. And in another vision, I was shown that we will conquer Yemen, and I can see the gates of Sana'a from here. So he saw this, and the Jews at this point, who were neighboring the Muslims in Medina, they saw this and started laughing, saying, "You are digging a ditch around your city out of desperation to survive, and you're talking about conquering the greatest empires in the world at that point." And the Jews started laughing. But lo and behold, within 10 years of the passing of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu the Muslims have conquered all of Syria, have conquered all of Iran, have marched into North Africa, have conquered all of Egypt. By the time Uthman radiallahu anhu's reign comes in, so after Prophet Muhammad sallallahu passes away, you have the reigns of Abu Bakr, the reign of Umar, and the reign of Uthman radiallahu anhu, right? And within their reigns, and obviously Abu Bakr was more trying to consolidate the Muslim world, but during the reigns of Umar and Uthman radiallahu anhuma, the Muslim empire now rules over all of Iran, all of Iraq, all of Syria, Egypt, and majority of North Africa. This is how and all of Arabia. This is how large the Muslim world becomes within a maximum of 20 years after the passing of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu. And it was such a rapid expansion. And obviously there's really interesting debates about, how comes the Muslims are able to expand so fast. And we won't go into it now because obviously time's sake, and the main focus is Muslim Spain and Iberia. We won't go into it, but these are some things you can look into. What were the reasons that the Muslims are able to conquer these lands so quickly and so fast? Something that it doesn't make sense. People that were, don't even know how to fight. At Badr, they were fighting with broken swords and lances and spears, all broken. They were fighting barefoot. How did they come and topple the greatest empires in the world, right? So these are some things you can look into in your own time. But then after Uthman radiallahu anhu passes away, and obviously a civil war takes place during Ali radiallahu anhu's reign, the Umayyad dynasty is established under Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, and the Muslims continue their expansion. Muawiyah and his son Yazid, and then the later caliphs to come. And during the reign of Abdul Malik bin Marwan, the Muslim world reaches the height of its expansion. And this is where, obviously, at that time, the conquest of Spain comes in. Now, before we look at the Muslims conquering Iberia and, making that journey across the sea, and landing in Iberia, what was Iberia like? This is something that we need to look into, right? What was the Iberian Peninsula like before Islam? Who did the Muslims go and conquer? and why were they able to conquer it so easily, right? So Iberia was ruled by someone called the Visigoths, okay? And it was called the Visigoth Kingdom. Now, who were they? These were a people that they came from like Eastern Europe, Central Europe, that region, and they were known to be very rebellious because those regions were ruled by the Roman Empire. At its height, the Roman Empire ruled most of these lands, right? Probably one of the largest empires and greatest empires to ever exist, the Romans, right? Be it they're non-Muslim, but they're still one of the greatest empires to ever exist. And they used to rule. So the Visigoths, they were part of the Roman Empire, but they were a very rebellious group. They used to constantly rebel against the Romans. Once they even rebelled, the rebellion was so large that they even sacked or they even went and raided Rome, the eternal city, as the Romans used to call it, right? One of the main cities in Roman civilization, the Roman Empire, was Rome, right? And they even managed to go and sack that. So they were very rebellious, but at the same time, not like any ordinary small rebellious group. They were very powerful. And so they established their rule in that region, Eastern and Central Europe. And that was under King, I can't remember the king's name. I think it was King Alaric. I'm not exactly sure what his name was, but after his death, the Visigoths, they started to migrate because obviously there's still a group, right? A nomadic group. They started migrating towards Iberia. And when they went to Iberia, that's when they established their rule and they started ruling over the Iberian Peninsula. So the Iberian Peninsula was ruled by these guys, the Visigoth kingdom. Now, even though they were obviously, like we said, a powerful, strong group, they weren't free from problems. From the moment they established themselves in Iberia, they had internal problems the whole time. Political instability. Visigoth, obviously, the royal family was ruling, but then you had other rival factions trying to always, impede on their authority and take authority away. So this constantly happened, and it weakened the Visigoth kingdom. It's not like the Muslims came and they battled against a very powerful state. It was quite a weak state. And we look at why this made things so easy for the Muslims. In 710 CE, a man called Roderick, he becomes the king of the Visigoth kingdom and is ruling over the Iberian Peninsula. With a disputed succession, some people thought it should be someone else. He put his claim forward, and in the end, he takes the throne. Now, when he takes the throne, right away he inherits a heap of trouble. A huge issues are going on in Iberia about the succession, about his family. Other families want to take over. There are families who don't like him and want to rebel against him. There's a lot of problems going on, and his authority is very weak in Iberia. Okay. That's what Iberia was like before the Muslims ruled over. Ruled by the Visigoths, but they were always fighting with each other. They didn't really like the royal family, and central authority was very, very weak. Now, so how do the Muslims enter the story, right? So again, if we look at our map here, might be a better map somewhere. Actually, let's stick with this map here. So if you look at our map here, obviously you can see that the Muslims, aside from the green part that they're ruling over in Spain, the Muslims had expanded all the way into North Africa. Obviously, the expansion into North Africa started under the reign of Umar radiallahu anhu. So way back when Amr ibn al-As, one of the famous companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu, he petitioned and he constantly kept asking Umar radiallahu anhu, can you please conquer Egypt? It's there for the taking. And Umar radiallahu anhu initially says, no, like, we're not ready for it yet. I want to consolidate our control over Syria and Iraq. And Umar asks, but it's there for the taking. Like, if we go now, it's easy for us. And so then Umar radiallahu anhu eventually gives him permission. And Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu leads the Muslim army into Cairo and Alexandria, and he conquers Egypt. After conquering Egypt, the Muslim army sort of halts there. And then afterwards, under the command of a man called Uqba bin Nafi', rahimahullah, they go and they conquer the majority of North Africa. And the Muslims are now ruling all of North Africa, right up to modern day Morocco, the Maghreb region, as they used to call it then, all the way up and into the sort of Morocco, the tip right there, just before Iberia. Now the Muslims had already expanded to North Africa, right? And they've been leading raids. They've been raiding Iberia for a long time. They've already been raiding Iberia, so it's not like they land in Iberia for the first time. They've already been raiding Iberia. And the man that was in charge of Maghreb, that region, modern day Morocco, the man that was governing this for the Umayyads, his name was Musa ibn Nusayr. So if you look here, you have his name, Musa bin Nusayr. He was the Umayyad governor of the Maghrib region. Now, one of the royal families from Iberia, the Visigoth kingdom, reached out to Musa bin Nusayr and asked for help to fight against King Roderick, saying, "You guys are really powerful. We would like your army to come and help us." Right? So Musa bin Nusayr receives this. He also receives some support from a Christian Byzantine governor. So he was an old Roman governor that was in the Maghreb region. He turned, when the Muslims came, he basically surrendered and he took the side of the Muslims. They also received support from him, and they basically say that he basically says that, look, if you want to conquer Iberia, our army, I will help you. I know the defenses of Iberia, I know the land, I know the region, I can help you. So all this together, Musa bin Nusayr takes the decision that I will, uh, invade, or I will conquer. I will send my armies to conquer Iberia. Now, there's also some more information that some of the reports said that King Roderick had actually um, behaved in an inappropriate manner with one of the one of the daughters of one of the noble families in the Visigoth kingdom. So one of the nobles in the Visigoth kingdom, he had a daughter, and King Roderick had behaved in an inappropriate way with her. And because of that, they also supported the Muslims to come and overthrow King Roderick. So all that taken into account, Musa bin Nusayr dispatches his main general, Tariq bin Ziyad, with 10,000, around 7,000 to 10,000 soldiers, and they go and land in Gibraltar. Now, Gibraltar is literally on the southern tip of so again, if you look at the map on this southern tip, so right here on the southern tip of modern day Spain, of Iberia, Gibraltar is right there. And so he lands there. Now, why is it called Gibraltar? It's actually taken from the Arabic name Jabal at-Tariq. And Jabal at-Tariq, it literally means mountain of Tariq, meaning the place that Tariq bin Ziyad landed, that is Jabal at-Tariq. And so they call that Gibraltar today. So he landed in Gibraltar with 10,000 soldiers, and very famously, he burned all his ships. He ordered for all his ships to be burnt. And he said, either I will conquer these lands or I will die here. Meaning there is no room for retreat. Whatever happens, there is no room for escape or retreat. I will stay here, and whatever happens, I will conquer this land or I will die. There is no retreat. And obviously, moments of bravery like this is common amongst Islamic history, right? So many instances like these happen. The Muslims, they put themselves in these difficult situations where it's either victory or death. There is no other option. There is no retreat. There is no surrender. So Tariq bin Ziyad, he displays again this bravery and courage in the face of overwhelming odds, and we'll look at the strength of the Christians in a moment. So Tariq bin Ziyad lands there, and after he lands there, because the army is so large, 7,000, 10,000 soldiers, clearly not a raiding party, right? So the king, he realizes this, and he assembles his army. He realizes, okay, this is not a raiding party. I can't just send a few soldiers over. This is an entire raiding party. So we have to be ready to fight against this army. So he sends out his letters, and he assembles an army as large as he can. But again, a lot of the people don't really want to listen to him because they don't like him. So he managed to assemble 15 to 20,000 soldiers. The number is heavily disputed. Some say it's less, some say it's more, but around 15 to 20,000 soldiers he manages to assemble. And the Muslims, 7,000, 10,000 soldiers, and the Visigoths, the Christian army, they meet by the river Guadalete, and this results in the famous Battle of Guadalete. Now, the Muslim army wasn't as strong as they were in previous battles. The reason is because actually the main Umayyad army, the cavalry, the strong armored cavalry, they had actually, after the conquest of North Africa, most of them returned back home. So they went back to the Middle East or Egypt, wherever they came from, Asia. They went back to these regions. Or most of them settled in North Africa. They never wanted to go for another fight. So Tariq bin Ziyad, he does have some Umayyad cavalry, but they don't have the main Umayyad cavalry. And so his army isn't as powerful as the Muslims might have hoped for it to be. And obviously they are outnumbered as well. Um, and as the battle begins, for 2 days, the armies go at it, but there is no victory. It's a bit of a stalemate. The Christians lose a lot, the Muslims lose a lot. But because obviously the Christians have a lot more soldiers, it looks like that their numbers will allow them to win. But then on the third day, Tariq bin Ziyad, he goes to his soldiers and he tells them off, actually, for retreating on the second day. He's like, why are we here for if you're going to retreat? And he says, on the third day, he says, tomorrow morning, I will lead the charge myself. I will lead the army. So usually he was staying back and monitoring the army and giving orders, saying, okay, on the right side, I want you to attack. On the left side, I want you to attack. Right side, I want you to pull back now. But he says, now I will lead the army myself. And he leads the army. And on the third day, the Muslims managed to win. Rumors begin to spread that whilst the fighting is happening on the third day, that King Roderick has died. He didn't die. It was a rumor. And because of that, the Christian soldiers, they end up retreating. Roderick, in the end, was obviously killed as well. Now, just an important lesson, obviously, and again, something that we see commonly recurring in history. We can think about like what are some of the main reasons that the Muslims were able to win this massive victory, right? One thing that is, again, with Ajahn Institute, we try to focus on, especially when it comes to history, is not just tell you, okay, this happened. You can go on YouTube and find that. You can open up a book and read that. One thing we want to try and understand is pedagogy. We want to try and understand the causes, the consequences, the similarities, the difference, change, continuity. We want to recognize all of these. We call them in history second order principles. We want to try and understand these so that we can analyze history better. If you know how to do these, analyze these causes, consequences, second order principles, you have the tools to study history yourself. And history becomes so much more fun when you can do these things. It's not just, okay, I'm learning about names and dates and events. I'm thinking, why did this actually happen? What was the consequence of this? If this didn't happen, if Tariq bin Ziyad didn't lead the army, would the Muslims manage to conquer Spain or Iberia? And if they don't conquer Iberia, what happens? So you get to grapple with all these other ideas and what ifs and stuff like that and buts. Once we start understand second order principle, second order concept, sorry. So here, one of the main discussion points is, was Tariq bin Ziyad's leadership the main cause of Muslim victory, or was it the Christian weaknesses, that the fact that most of them didn't want to support King Roderick in the first place, right? Or was it that no, it was Tariq bin Ziyad, it was his strong leadership? So some things for us to think about as a takeaway from this webinar. So the Visigoth army sustains heavy losses in this battle, and because of that, the Muslims are able to mop up the rest of Iberia and take most of the Christian cities. A lot of the Christian rulers from different cities, the governors, they sign agreements quickly with the Muslims and say, look, we'll accept your rule, it's fine, we don't want to fight anymore, because they don't have the strength. Right now, the Muslims have taken Iberia, more Muslim armies would continue pouring into Iberia. So there's no hope for them, basically, and so they surrender. Okay, so that is how the Muslims established their rule over the Iberian Peninsula. And here you can see this is a painting by Salvador Martinez in the 19th century. Actually, he makes this very famous painting of the Visigothic retreat in front of the Berber cavalry. Okay, so Muslim cavalry basically. Now, so what happens afterwards? After the Muslims conquer Iberia, Tariq bin Ziyad, the Muslim general, and Musa bin Nusayr, the governor, they actually end up falling out with each other because they have some disputes about how the land should be divided and how the loot should be divided. And because of the sort of this dispute that they have with each other, the Umayyad Khalifa, he summons both of them to Damascus, sends a letter saying, I want you both to come to Damascus right away. And they both make their way to Damascus. Obviously, the order is from the Khalifa, so they can't reject this order. So they begin making their way to Damascus. Just as they're about to arrive, they find out that the Khalifa is about to pass away. And there's a succession crisis that goes on. The Khalifa, he supports one of his sons, but the other son ends up taking over. And he wants to take over, so he ends up taking over. Now, Musa bin Nusayr actually supported the son that didn't win, that didn't take over, because he supported him and he lost. Tariq bin Ziyad and Musa bin Nusayr were taken prisoner, and they were paraded around Damascus as a sign to anyone who dares to rebel against the Khalifa that this is what will happen to you. And then the Khalifa, he sends letters, he sends orders to Iberia, to Al-Andalus, that all the children of Musa bin Nusayr. So before Musa bin Nusayr left for Damascus, he appointed his children, his sons, to rule over the different parts of Iberia. And the Khalifa sends a letter to Iberia, his people in Iberia, saying that I'm ordering for the sons of Musa bin Nusayr to be executed. And so they were caught and executed. And what happens now is a massive rebellion breaks out amongst a large part of North Africa and Iberia. amongst the Berber population. So the Berbers were basically like native, you can say, North Africans in Tunisia, Algeria, mainly in Morocco. So Tariq bin Ziyad, he was part of these, right? So these Berbers, they end up rebelling against the Umayyads because like then they're not happy with the way they're being treated, especially with the execution of Musa bin Nusayr's children. So they end up rebelling. Now, this is a very key theme. As you see, as we do the story of Muslim Spain, it's a key theme that comes up again and again and again. The Muslims go and conquer, they make the region Andalus strong, and then they end up fighting with each other. Then they go on, someone comes and helps them, they conquer it, and then they end up fighting with each other. And the same thing happens again and again, and the Muslims sort of lose control as time goes on because of this. So there's something really important for, a similarity, something that continues over time, the same thing, this idea of fighting with one another, leading to the downfall of Iberia, right? So what happens next? Now that the Umayyads are ruling over Muslim Spain doesn't really develop. It's just like a faraway province for a long time. They don't really develop Iberia. They just leave it as somewhere that's like a faraway Muslim province, Umayyad province. Until the middle of the 8th century, where an rebellion breaks out amongst the Abbasids. So the Abbasid family, who claim descent from the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abbas radiallahu anhu, they claim descent from him, and they say they basically they claim that the Umayyads are not being fair. Claims of nepotism. They accuse of nepotism. That the nepotism is basically when you favor your own family and you give them positions of power and money and wealth, as opposed to meritocracy, where you're giving positions of power based on who deserves it more, who is the most capable. So Umayyads they didn't care about who's the most capable, they gave it to the family instead. So the Abbasids are not happy, and large parts of the Muslim world are not happy with this. So they all join together, they support the Abbasid family, and in the end, the Abbasid family overthrow the Umayyads. Now, when they overthrow the Umayyads, they launch they give orders that any Umayyad dynasty member that is found will be executed. So they hunt down any Umayyad dynasty member and try and execute them. Now, the reason for that is to make sure that Abbasid rule is secure. Now, obviously, we can say all these things like, oh, but that's not fair. Muslims, how can they hunt other people down, this, that? It's politics, right? This is just how politics works. The Umayyads, to ensure that their rule over Iberia is strong, not Iberia, sorry, of the Muslim world is strong, they have to make sure there's no rivals. And so they have to destroy the Umayyad dynasty in totality. And that's why they issue this order, this decree to hunt down all Umayyad dynasty members and execute them. Now, one Umayyad dynasty member manages to run away and flee. His name is Abdul Rahman. So Abdul Rahman makes the journey. Again, if we go back to our map, he makes the daring journey all the way across Egypt and Libya, modern-day Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, all of these regions. And he goes to North Africa, to Maghreb. He gets on a ship and he goes to Iberia, Al-Andalus. Now, how was he able to do this? One of the reasons is because his mother was actually a Berber. So Abdurrahman I, his mother was a Berber, and because obviously she is very well respected amongst the Berber population, the Berbers help his mother and Abdurrahman and allow them to take a boat over to Iberia. And he establishes an Umayyad emirate there. So an independent Umayyad emirate, an Umayyad state, independent from the Abbasids. So the Abbasids are ruling over everything apart from, or the entire Muslim world apart from Iberia, Muslim Spain. He establishes an Umayyad emirate there. And he begins work on making this a grand civilization. And that's really where he lays down the foundations of that golden age that comes in Iberia. He constructs this grand masjid here. Now it's become a cathedral, but he constructs this grand masjid of Cordoba. And he begins work on other things that he plants the seeds to allow the Umayyad Emirate Al-Andalus to flourish. And really, it's during the reign of Abdurrahman III, one of Abdurrahman I's descendants. So Abdurrahman III, that's when the golden age in Iberia begins. He makes Cordoba one of the largest cities in Europe, not just Europe, but in the world, one of the grandest and largest cities in the world. He builds libraries, 600 libraries he builds. As we said at the beginning, over 400,000 books are built there. He expands scholarship, and some of the greatest scholars in history, in Islamic history, or just in general to ever walk the face of this earth are in Spain at this time. the education system in Spain is so advanced that people from France, from Italy, from other parts, from Germany, all of these people, they're coming to Spain to study. The Renaissance, that's period in the Renaissance that happens in Europe is because of the advancements in medicine, in technology, in Al-Andalus. They take this from Al-Andalus and they take it to back with them to France, to Britain, and all these different places. He builds a very famous palace called Madinatul Zahra. A very famous palace in Iberia is also built. The streets are lit, by the way. They have street lighting systems, candles across with oil across the streets. These light up the street so it's not dark at nighttime. They have very sophisticated water system. They have public bathhouses, so to make sure that people are always washing. In Europe at this time, by the way, you weren't meant to be washing all the time because it was seen as a problem if you can constantly washed. That's why they had so many diseases. But in Iberia, in Al-Andalus, the public bathhouses were made so people can go and wash themselves. They had clean, sophisticated water systems because they knew that disease comes from contaminated water. So they made sure that the water systems were also kept clean. So all of this allowed Al-Andalus to flourish and a golden age. It was a cultural melting pot, as Firas al-Khatib mentions in Lost Islamic History, that it was a cultural melting pot. People from so many different cultures came to Al-Andalus. They merged together. Jews, Muslims, Christians, all living together at this time. The Jews were given lots and lots of perks in Al-Andalus. The Christians were given lots of perks in Al-Andalus as well. So it became a flourishing, a hub of Muslim civilization, a beacon of Muslim civilization, a hub of different cultures coming together and collaborating. So this was the golden age of Al-Andalus. Again, for time's sake, we can't go into everything, but there was so much more things that they achieved during that golden age. But just so I can give you a comprehensive, you know, chronology of the events. We can't really go into it in too much detail, but again, I'd recommend you can check out our institute page. We have an entire section on Al-Andalus, or you can also do some extra reading. Firas al-Khatib in Lost Islamic History has an entire chapter dedicated just to Al-Andalus. So again, I would recommend you read on that as well. Now, obviously, this also doesn't last. As with anything, no civilization lasts forever. And as time went on, the Muslims became caught up with these luxuries that they had, and the same zeal and passion that existed during the time of Abdul the first, second, and third. These didn't exist amongst their descendants, and so they became caught up with wealth and gold, and they withdrew from making sure that there's effective governance, that the army is very strong. And so when the time came to actually fight, the army was very weak. And what happened is slowly, the Christians, they started encroaching on Muslim territory. They became united and they started slowly piecemeal taking over Muslim territory from Iberia. And the Muslims, they also started fighting with each other. So remember what I said about before, Musa bin Nusayr and Tariq bin Ziyad started quarreling with each other, and this led to weakness amongst Iberia, Al-Andalus. Same thing happening again. The Umayyad governors, so Abdurrahman III, imagine that he's ruling over the entire region, but he appoints different governors of different cities, and they start quarreling amongst one another. And what happens is this leads to the first Taifa period. And what this period is basically a period of different cities in claiming independence from centralized Umayyad rule. So one city here says, I'm an independent city, I have my own ruler. Another city will say, I have my own ruler. Another city will say, I have my own ruler, and they all become independent. And this leads to an independent Taifa period, and the Muslims become very weak at this point. Now, whilst they are weak at this point, the Christians, they start encroaching on Muslim territory and slowly start taking Muslim territory from the Muslims, right? And as this happens, the Muslims, as they start to lose some of this territory, the Umayyad governors, the independent rulers, they write to the Muslim a group called the Murabitun. So Murabitun, these were a group that were ruling over North Africa. So they establish an independent state from the Abbasids in North Africa. So if you see this green part, this is what they were ruling over. Aside from Spain, this is what they were ruling over, right? And so they write to the Murabitun and say, look, we really need some help. We are losing and our army is not powerful enough to fight off this Christian alliance. Please come and help us. So a man called Yusuf ibn Tashfin the ruler of Iberia, the Murabitun dynasty, he accepts this, and he goes and claims he accepts this call for aid, and he crosses over the Strait of Gibraltar just like Tariq bin Ziyad did all those years ago, and he goes and he drives back the Christians, and Muslim rule of Al-Andalus is secure once again. Now, whilst Muslim rule is secure once again, and Yusuf bin Tashfin, he becomes one of the most powerful, possibly the most powerful, because the Abbas have broken up at this point. Yusuf bin Tashfin becomes one of the most powerful rulers at this in the Muslim world after he goes to conquer Al-Andalus. Now, when he does go to conquer Al-Andalus, interestingly enough, when he does go to conquer Al-Andalus, one of the first things he doesn't conquer Al-Andalus, by the way, sorry. What he does is he crosses over, he helps the Muslims in Andalus, and then he comes back. He comes back. He doesn't interfere. He says, okay, I've helped you. I've destroyed the Christians, their army. Now you guys continue doing what you're doing. I'm going to go back and I'm going to rule North Africa. I didn't come here to conquer. I just came here to help. He does this. A while later, the Muslims in Andalus again ask Yusuf bin Tashfin, can you please come and help us? Yusuf bin Tashfin goes again. He helps them. He comes back. The third time they reach out to Yusuf bin Tashfin, this time he doesn't just go to help them. He says, you know what? The only way we're going to make sure Muslim rule is secure is if my armies are there permanently and Al-Andalus is brought under my control and the control of my dynasty. So he goes there, and this time he takes an army there, this time with the intention of conquering it and maintaining a permanent presence in Al-Andalus. So he goes, he defeats the Christians, and he takes over control of Al-Andalus. And also the governors, they don't have the power to say no because their armies are not strong enough. So Yusuf bin Tashfin and the Murabitun, they are now ruling over Al-Andalus. And he was, like we said, one of the most powerful men in the Muslim world at this time. His empire stretched all the way from Ghana down to Al-Andalus at its peak. And one of the things that made him so popular is that he was a very pious man. The people saw him as he advocated a return to traditional Islam. I mean, let's go back to the prophetic teachings. Aside from all of this, we've been caught up in science, we've been caught up in wealth. It's good that we've advanced science, but we need to make sure that we are also sticking to our Islamic roots. And so that made him very popular amongst the people. And he continued to rule over the Al-Andalus for a while. But then again, the same thing happens again. Like we said, Tariq bin Ziyad and Musa bin Nusayr, they start to quarrel amongst each other. The Umayyad governors quarrel amongst each other. Yusuf bin Tashfin, his descendants, and that are ruling over the Al-Andalus, the region, they also start to quarrel amongst one another, and they also decline. And Cordoba itself rebelled against their rule. So Cordoba, one of the grandest cities in Al-Andalus, they rebel against the Murabitun, and the Murabitun begin to lose control. And a second Taifa period begins where independent cities are now ruling over Al-Andalus again. There is no centralized governance. They are ruling over different cities are ruling independently once again. And so what do? They reach out to the Muwahhidun. So these are another group from the that were ruling over North Africa, that they had taken over a large part of the Murabitun dynasty, a lot of their territory they'd taken over, and they reach out to the Muwahhidun, and the Muwahhidun, they come to Iberia and they rule over Al-Andalus. In the middle of the 12th century, they take over Al-Andalus. They end this second Taifa period, but the problem is a bit too late. The Christians had already taken over a large part of large parts of Iberia. So really all that's left now, so if you go all the way back to, if you look at some of our maps and you look at the change over time, this is how much the Muslims are ruling over at the beginning, in the Umayyad period, at its height. They're ruling over pretty much all of Iberia and part of southern France. When the Murabitun come over, you can see they've lost a large part of northwest Iberia. They've lost a large part of it. And obviously southern France is also gone. Even Barcelona itself, you can see here, modern day Barcelona is also no longer under Muslim rule. And now when the Muwahhidun come, it's even less. It's less than half of Iberia that is left with the Muslims. So as time goes on, the Muslims lose more and more of the Iberian Peninsula. And Al-Andalus is very, very small at this time. But having said all of that, the Muwahhidun still lead an Islamic revival. Scholars like Ibn Rushd, Ibn Arabi, all of them, they are in Al-Andalus at this time. And so there's a huge scholarly revival of academia and education in Al-Andalus. So Al-Andalus sees a large scale revival in terms of education, in terms of the economy, but they are still militarily not very strong. And so the Christians, they see that, they come together and they form a crusade. And at the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, or as the Muslims know it as Al-Uqab, that was the name of the battle, Muslims suffer a huge defeat in the beginning of the 13th century. So 1147, the Muwahhidun come and they establish their rule. Within 60 years, they have lost, or about 55 years, they have lost, if my maths is correct. I don't think it's correct. I think it's over 60 years. The Christians, they lose their control. The Muslims rule their control over Al-Andalus, the Muwahhidun. Cordoba falls in 1236. The grand city that Abdurrahman III, he didn't build it, but he developed it into one of the greatest cities in Islamic history, now falls under the rule of the Christians. And again, why did they fall into this? The Muwahhidun, again, it was complacency and infighting amongst each other once again. So you see that same pattern repeating again and again. And obviously, we're pointing towards a certain lesson, right? That as Muslims, we should take for ourselves, that in unity lies strength, in division is our defeat, right? So they become really weak because of that, and Cordoba also falls. And the last main city under Muslim rule is Granada. And that is what we'll look at now. So the Emirate of Granada, the Muslims, they established one final emirate, one final state in Granada. And this was ruled by the Nasrid dynasty. They ruled over Granada. But the key difference here between the Muwahhidun, the Murabitun, the Umayyad Emirate, all of this, is that they were completely independent. This Nasrid dynasty, it is not an independent state. They are tributaries to Castile. So Castile was one of the Christian states that was taking over Iberia. Castile and Aragon, they were two different states. So Castile took over a large part of Iberia from the Muslims. And the Nasrid dynasty, the Emirate of Granada, they were tributaries to Castile. What does that mean, to be a tributary? It means that you pay annual tax, an annual tribute, an annual tax to whoever you're a tributary to. So they used to pay annual tax to the Christians, to the Kingdom of Castile. And the Kingdom of Castile had a lot of control over the Nasrid foreign policy. The economy was dominated by the European Italian merchants. The Christians, the Castile, the kingdom, they had control over what Granada was able to export and import. So you can see they were heavily under the control of Castile. But regardless of all of this, Muslims do not give up. And amidst this decline, amidst this suffering, and you can imagine what the Muslims are going through, looking around, seeing, wow, we used to rule over such a large part of Iberia. We were a grand civilization. Now we're reduced to this one small state. Amidst all of that, the Muslims, in defiance, they erect one last grand structure called the Alhambra Palace. And Alhambra Palace is like no ordinary palace, right? It's not like your Topkapi Palace. It's not like your palaces in Damascus or Baghdad. It's not like any of these. What he did, the Nasrid dynasty, when they made this Alhambra Palace, what they did is they combined Umayyad architecture, they combined Murabitun architecture, Muwahhidun architecture, and their own Nasrid architecture, and together they combined all of that to build one palace, to remind the Muslims of how great the Muslim civilization was in Iberia. That once these guys used to rule, once the Murabitun used to rule, once the Umayyad Emir used to rule, all of them, they used to rule over it. So to remind them of the heyday of Muslim Spain, of the grandness of that civilization, of the magnificence of that civilization, they construct this large palace that combines between these different architectures. But despite all of this, again, internal civil wars between the Nasrids weakens the rule. So again, they still don't learn their lesson. And obviously not to criticize them, because, we're not here to criticize the people of the past, right? We were never put in their position. So I'm not here to criticize them. But again, it's this repeating one factor about internal strife. They begin to fight with one another, and Nasr's rule begins to weaken. Very importantly, this man here, if you see on the PowerPoint, is Muhammad the 12th. Muhammad the 12th and his family, they quarrel with one another. The father takes the throne, then the son overthrows him, then the father comes back and takes it, but then the son receives help from the Christians and overthrows the father again. So now between father and son there was quarreling. And in the end, Castile and Aragon, they unite through marriage, the two Christian kingdoms. They unite through marriage, they besiege Granada, and in 1491, Muhammad the 12th surrenders, and Muslim rule over Iberia comes to a complete end. 800 years, nearly 800 years from 710 CE, from when Tariq bin Ziyad landed in Gibraltar, all the way to 1491/1492, the Muslims, they ruled over the region for that entire time. But in 1491, the flags of Islam of La Ghaliba illallah. So if you go to Alhambra Palace, one thing you will see engraved across the wall is La Ghaliba illallah, meaning there is no victor except Allah. And that is something that is engraved across the palace, or the Alhambra Palace. And some of the scholars, they very famously say that they engraved it onto the palace, but they forgot to etch it into their hearts. And that's why they were defeated. And so Muhammad the 12th, he surrenders, and the flags that say La Ghaliba illallah, the flags of Islam and La Ghaliba illallah, they are brought down one final time. And the flag of Christendom, Castile and Aragon, they are planted atop the palace of Alhambra. And very famously, Muhammad the 12th, as he was sent to exile, and as he was walking out of his palace, he looked back at the gates. Outside the gates, he looked back at his palace, and he began to cry. And his mother scolded him, saying, "Why are you crying like a woman when you could not defend it like a man?" And she scolds him. Again, this is not to say, obviously, like, why is he crying like a woman or something like this. It's just what they understood at that time, right? It's not to say like man or woman or anything like this. It's just to say that this is how this is the context of that time in history we find. These are how people spoke, right? This is how things were. And so she scolded him for this, for crying. She said, "You couldn't defend it like a man, so there's no point crying now." But obviously, even though Granada had fallen and the Muslim rule had fallen, the Muslims were still a large part of Al-Andalus, right? And the Christians know this. They're not stupid. You can't just exile such a large part of your population, right? You can't just exile them and send them away, because they make up a large part of your workforce, a large part of your economy. If you send them away, what are you going to do? How are you going to run your country, right? So because of that, they don't send them away straight away. They keep them, but they begin to put harsh measures on them. Over 500,000 Muslims are still in Iberia. And initially they were tolerated, they were allowed certain religious freedom and stuff like this. But as time went on, their toleration became lower and lower. And the laws that were placed on the Muslims became harsher and harsher. And the Muslims, they began to rebel. They were being forced to convert to Islam. And they didn't like that, so they rebelled. But these rebellions weren't successful, and so it led to harsher repression against the Muslims, harsher laws put in place against the Muslims. And some of the things that they were forced to do is they weren't allowed to fast, they weren't allowed to pray, the women were allowed to wear hijab, even weddings were not allowed to be done in the Islamic way, according to Islamic customs. So what happened was different Christian weddings and different Muslim weddings in small villages, we had something called the Christian elders. So these were like basically, really old people amongst the Christian communities. They were sent to supervise Muslim weddings to make sure that they weren't done in Islamic ways. Forced to eat pork, all of these things. Fatwas were given that allowed Muslims to, instead of doing their 5 prayers in the day, because they weren't allowed to do it, if they were caught, they would be, executed or very harshly tortured. They were allowed to do their prayers at nighttime. They were allowed to skip fasts. Some fatwas even allowed them to eat pork, just because if they didn't, then it was a sign that they were not hadn't accepted Christianity. So what the Christians did, they forced them to accept Islam. And obviously now the Muslims can secretly continue, say outwardly, yes, that we do it, but secretly continue practicing. But they were forced to do things like eat pork and make sure that they weren't allowed to do any Islamic practices, basically. Okay. Right. So having done all of that, with all of that, with all these sort of measures in place against the Muslims, it's a very, very difficult time for them. In the end, the King Philip II, he ordered the expulsion of the Moriscos. So Moriscos are basically the people that were still living in Iberia, the Muslims. So the Moriscos, he gives a final order that they should be, in 1609, they should be expelled. And so they take their possessions with them, whatever possessions they can. Ships are arranged for them to go into, North Africa. The Ottomans also reach out to the Muslims saying, look, we will take you in. Obviously, one of the reasons the Ottomans don't help is right now they are very busy elsewhere. They're fighting in Asia, they're fighting in Europe, so they're very, very busy elsewhere. They're fighting in the Mediterranean, so they're extremely busy with their own issues. So one of the reasons other Muslims don't come and help them is because the Muslim world, Spain wasn't the only issue. They're facing issues in so many other places at the same time. So, and if the Muslims send a large army to, Spain, then it's entirely possible that Europeans attack the Muslims in the Ottomans in Europe, in Hungary and places like that. So they may lose control. So they order the King Philip III, sorry, of Spain. He orders that the Muslims be sent away, they be expelled. They take all the belongings with them, but once they arrive at the port where their ships are waiting to take them, all their belongings are confiscated, and they're told that they can only go on their ships. Children under 4 were not allowed to go. The Christians took those children. Any children that were under the age of 4, they were taken by the Christians and they were kept in Spain to be raised as Christians. So again, a very difficult time for the Muslims. They're being tortured, oppressed. They're now being told to, they're now being kicked out of Spain, but they can't even take their own children with them. They can't take any of their belongings with them. All of that is confiscated. And by 1614, so 5 years after the order is given, the last Muslims leave Spain, and there is no trace of Islam. There are no Muslims left in Spain at that time. Now, just before as they're all leaving, Firas al-Khatibi very nicely says that the Moriscos came out openly and called the Adhan. The glory days of Islam in Spain were long gone, but the rebels managed to revive the memory of Al-Andalus one last time. So what happens here is the Moriscos, they come out, and as the Muslims, as they're being expelled, they come out and they give the adhan for one last time, as loudly as possible. They gave the adhan, and it reminds the people of how great Muslim civilization was in Spain, how much they managed to achieve, and how magnificent the Muslims were at one point. And it reminds them they managed to revive the memory of Al-Andalus one last time. Everyone remembers those days where, at dawn, when the Fajr time came, the entirety of Iberia, the adhan would echo across the streets. The Muslims would go together, Asr time, Maghrib time, they would all break their fast in Ramadan. The Muadhin would give the adhan, and the courtyards of the masjids were full of people breaking their fast. They remember all these things, and the memory of Al-Andalus was revived one last time. But obviously this didn't lead to anything further, and the last Muslims in 1614 were expelled from Spain. And so that brings us to the end of our history of Al-Andalus and Muslim Spain. And regardless of what's happened, we've seen the rise, the decline, the revive, and the eventual collapse of Muslim rule over Spain. Regardless of what happens, Al-Andalus leaves behind a rich legacy, not only in terms of, in so many different fields: intellectual legacy, the preservation and transition of classic and scientific knowledge. Like we said, the Europeans were very behind on medicine. They were very behind in science, technology, and architecture, but all of this came to Europe through Spain. The Renaissance was sparked because of knowledge that they took from Spain. The cultural legacy that Al-Andalus is behind, again, architecture, the Arabic influence on the Spanish language. The Spanish language has a large Arabic influence as well. The historical importance, the Muslim world is connected to the medieval world of France, Germany, Britain, all of England, Scotland, all of these places were connected to the Islamic world through Muslim Spain, and interactions between Muslims and Christians took place through Muslim Spain, right? And so Al-Andalus boasts a very rich legacy, and I would recommend everyone who can to go and visit the Alhambra Palace and see how great the Muslims were. Go see the inscriptions. Go visit Cordoba. Go visit Granada and see how great the Muslims were there. And and go visit the streets and feel the pain and the suffering, the rocks and stones there that will bear testimony to the suffering that the Muslims went through. Go there and visit them, walk amongst the same streets that our forefathers did in their footsteps of Abdurrahman III, and all these great people of Tariq bin Ziyad. Go visit Jabal Tariq, pay our respects to these people, and see what the Muslims left behind. We as Muslims, we are out of touch with our history. And because of that, we are people that we walk with our heads down in shame because we feel like, we're people that we don't really have much to be proud of. But when you look at what the Muslims achieved in Al-Andalus, if you know what the Muslims achieved in Istanbul, in Constantinople, what they achieved in Damascus, in Baghdad, in Timbuktu, and all these places, in Songhai, all these places, if you know what we managed to achieve, you will realize that the Muslims boast of the richest and greatest heritage and history amongst all of human civilization. And so we will walk with our heads up, proud of what we have achieved. So go to Al-Andalus and see what the Muslims achieved and be proud of all of that. And so Al-Andalus, like we said, existed for more than 800 years, much more than just a military conquest, but one of the leading centers in the medieval world for trade, culture, state building, intellectual achievement, and so much more. All of that in Al-Andalus. And so that brings us to the end of our webinar on Al-Andalus. And obviously, if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat now. Any questions you have about Al-Andalus or even generally about Islamic history, so I'm here to answer those questions. So within my remit, whatever I can, and I do know, I will try to answer. So if you have any questions about Al-Andalus, about anything that we've spoken about, or generally about Islamic history, feel free to pop it into the chat now. Whilst you do that, whilst you think of any questions, one thing I would like to introduce us to is a new course that we will be launching starting sorry, the date there is wrong. It's not 5th August. It starts on the 28th of July, a course about the Ottoman Empire. So a 4-week course on the rise, the golden age, the decline, and then finally the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman Empire is one of the, personally my favorite. Anyone who knows me knows I love blabbing on about the Ottoman Empire all the time. Ottoman Empire is one of the greatest civilizations, again, one of the greatest empires in Muslim history. For 600 years alone, they carried the flag of Islam. Islam reached Europe because of them. They were such a great empire. They had one of the greatest armies to ever exist in history. The laws that they passed, revolutionary, the architecture that they had. If you go to Istanbul, anyone's been there, you will see. So we look at all these stories. We look at how the Muslim conquered Constantinople, how Turkey became Muslim, how the Muslims reached all the way to Austria, the gates of Vienna, and then they were stopped there, how what happened to them during World War One, and their eventual collapse. We look at all of these things. Just to put it into context about how long the Ottoman Empire lasted, the way I usually explain it is when they were established in the 1290s, in 1291, the empire was established fighting with swords and arrows and horses, and when they collapsed, it was during the time of tanks and airplanes. That's how long the Ottoman Empire lasted. Yeah, right. So if you want to know more about the Ottoman Empire and the final flag bearers of Islam, a legacy that we should remember because they did so much for Islam. In the 1800s and 1900s, they were the people carrying Islam. In World War One, they were the Muslims that were fighting. They were fighting for the Muslims, and they tried their best to keep Islam as strong as possible, all alone in a world that was dominated by the Christians, by nation states, by colonization, that were always scheming against the Muslims. At that time, they stood firm and they protected the Muslims as much as they can. And we try to think today, what if the Ottomans were around? Would what's happening in Palestine, in Sudan, in all these different regions, would that be happening if in Kashmir? Would this be happening if the Ottomans were still around, right? So we look at all of these things. And one unique thing about our courses, and I'm not to say that other courses don't do this or the other courses are not as good. Every, obviously, institute is working amazingly, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, except from all of them, and they're doing their amazing work in their own way. But one thing that we try to really focus on, like I said, is pedagogy. So we'll try to look at causes, consequences, similarities, differences. We try to look at how to interpret sources. So in this course, we'll look at, classic Ottoman sources in Turkish, and we'll look at how to interpret them and what are some limitations, what are some strengths of these sources. So we'll look at all of these things as well. So we'll be giving you the tools to study history as opposed to just sitting here and giving you a lecture. It'll be very interactive as well. It won't be just like a webinar here where I'll be speaking for the most part. It will be again very interactive where you'll be engaging as well to whatever, the extent that you feel comfortable with, obviously. We'll be engaging, having lots of collaborative discussions about why do you think this happened? Why do you think the Ottoman Empire was able to do this? Why did they collapse? We'll be looking at all of those things as well in our course. So it's £20 starting on Tuesday, 28th July, so the last Tuesday of this month. It's a 4-week course. Obviously, certificates will be provided at the end as well. So you can feel free to register. Again, if anyone has any financial difficulties at all, feel free to reach out to Ocean of Islam, to Ajnaden Institute. You have our email, so you can reach out and we'll be happy to try and accommodate whatever it is. You'll have your own student portal, resources will be provided, recordings will be provided. So yeah, it'll be a very interactive course and everything will be provided for you. So do join us, inshallah. Starting from the 28th of July, 4 weeks for only £20. And the lessons are 1 hour, but knowing me, I usually end up going overtime on my history lessons. All my students at school say the same thing, and everyone says it. So I usually end up going over, just like I have gone over today. So they might be longer as well and stuff. But again, it's all at your convenience, at your own comfort. Also, one more thing we would like to announce is that inshallah, the plan is nearly finalized. But if you'd like to register your interest, keep an eye out for Ajnaden Institute, our page. We'll be doing a tour to Muslim Spain at the end of October. It'll be a 6-day tour. Prices and the exact dates will all come out soon, inshallah. So keep an eye out for our Instagram, our TikTok, our website. More information will be there. But it'll be hosted by myself. We'll be going to Al-Andalus, Granada, Cordoba, and we'll be looking at the history there with different lectures at different places. Obviously, you'll be given admittance to Alhambra Palace, the cathedral in Cordoba, and we'll go and look at all the stuff we've spoken about. We'll go and literally walk in the footsteps of these people and see it firsthand what it actually looks like, and try to emotionally connect and hear the echoes of Al-Andalus when we go there. So again, stay up to date. Obviously, the dates and stuff will be finalized very soon and the prices will all go out. So stay up to date with our TikTok, our Instagram, and our website. More information will go out there. So 2 things, the course and our Muslim Spain tour. If there are no other questions, then obviously Ustadh has sent the link to the course, and the link will be sent out via emails, I believe, as well. So feel free to join afterwards. Any questions at all you have afterwards, you can email it to us. Be happy to have any discussions. If there's any further clarifications you need, feel free to ask at any point. Inshallah, we'll be happy to answer those. But having said that, if there are no other questions, then I pray Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts this lesson from all of us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept it from you all for attending and listening attentively. And from us, from Ajnaden Institute, from Ocean of Islam, thank you to Jazakallah Khair to our beloved Ustadh and Ocean of Islam for allowing this webinar to go ahead, for hosting it, for making it free for everyone to attend as well. So a massive Jazakallah Khairan to our Ustadh. We pray Allah preserves him, blesses him and his family. And yeah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept, forgive any shortcomings. Anything right I've said is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anything wrong I've said is from myself and shaitan. We will leave it there. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Wa sallallahu wa sallim wa barik ala sayyidina wa maulana wa nabiyina wa habibina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
عليكم السلام.